Good morning, everybody. My name is Maya Hickson, and I'm co-hosting this event with Leonard and Katie. We're from Families for a Livable Climate. Here, having this wonderful presentation by Thomas Doherty, who will be introduced in just a minute. I just wanted to give you guys a brief kind of run over of FLC, of Families for a Livable Climate, who we are and what we do. For those that aren't familiar, ours is a nonprofit organization. We're based here in Portland, Oregon. Been around for about a year now. And we're just a group of parents, guardians, grandparents, educators, kids of all kinds and families. We're working here locally and getting involved, nationally as well to advocate for policies and initiatives. We're addressing climate crisis and advance and climate justice in every way that we can. We're about elevating voices of parents and caretakers. We're united to fight for our children's future. It's kind of the underlying premise, and we know it can be hard to get involved as a guardian, as a caretaker. And so everything that we do is with families and parents in mind, how to make this fight and this action more accessible. Our current areas of action, kind of a number of groups going right now are in policy and advocacy, doing some really awesome programming in youth engagement for young children as well as teens and older youth. We're doing a lot around community resilience and build movement. We have obviously this group with webinars and online events, which is the newer component, but we've been adapting as everyone is to what's been going on. And this has been a really great way to get together, to get information out, to see each other and work on that community building aspect, which is so important to this kind of work. And we're a volunteer-led organization. We're always seeking to grow our community and grow our reach. If you're interested in getting more involved, if you're not already, then we're happy to have everyone who wants to help out. And you can find us at our website, familiesforclimate.org. You can always email us and we'll kind of help get you groups in, and we're just happy to have you guys. Thanks so much for being here. All right, Leonard, take it away.
Thanks, Maya. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. It's wonderful to have such a good group here, especially right coming into the election here when it feels hard to prioritize other things and kind of thinking about our self-care. So I'm glad to see so many people showing up here today. So yeah, again, I'm Leonard Barrett. I'm a board co-president at Families for a Livable Climate. My interest in this topic really stems from my own struggles with climate and eco-anxiety. And there are a few people who on this Zoom who've heard this story, but very, very briefly, a couple years ago, I made a New Year's resolution to stop looking away, as I kind of call it, from the climate crisis. Always something I was tracking, but I made a promise to myself and my kids to stop kind of doing the daily tuning out when I was feeling too intense, and that got intense really quickly. And so after a few months, I was tired of telling people how overwhelmed and anxious I was, and one night I Googled climate therapist Portland, and Thomas came up, and long story short, I've actually been a client of his ever since. And I'm really excited to bring this topic and this dialogue to Families for a Livable Climate, because we need to be effective activists and advocates for our kids' future and for the future of all kids. And the self-care, the work that we do to keep our mental and emotional house in order, so to speak, this really amplifies our effectiveness to take on this difficult work. And so glad they're doing this today, and I'm hoping that it's really just the start of a conversation about how we as parents take care of ourselves and each other to do the very important work of fighting for a thriving, livable climate planet for our kids' future. So with that, Thomas, you've been a real thought leader in this space, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And I'm going to spotlight you and turn it over.
Great, thanks, Leonard, and thanks, Maya and Katie and everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to share my screen in a second and show some slides, but I do want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak. This is something I've been involved in many years, and I've got a lot of ideas and a lot of things to share. So let me get going on the screen share, and it's a couple step process here, but hopefully it will all come together. That's good. And then let me share my slides. Okay. So are you all seeing my title slide? Is that working out okay? Leonard and group?
Not yet.
No?
I think we're not seeing a screen from you yet.
There
we go. Perfect.
Okay,
we did it.
All right. It's all downhill from there. If you can share your screen, we're doing good. Anyway, thanks again. So this is a climate parenting and climate talk. We're going to touch on a lot of things. It's an ecological topic, as I'll talk about, but it is meant to be a toolbox and a coping toolbox. And so that's the goal, is get some coping skills, get some things that you can chew on and share and activate in your life. Let's see if I can get things to go here. So I'll do a few things in this 30 minutes. I'm going to just share some of my ground rules for talking about environmental topics. And I'm going to talk a bit about this idea of environmental identity, which is kind of the key idea in my talk. It's kind of the diamond in the talk, and that'll help us to talk about child development and nature across the lifespan and coping with mental health impacts of climate change. I'll share some of the research I've done on mental health, so you can see some of the original ideas and where this comes from. And I'm brainstorming about what this kind of group might do. And then, we'll have time for dialogue and questions. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and I'll move fairly quickly, but please use the chat, and I can kind of try to scan that as I'm talking. And we'll have time during the breakouts and the dialogue to go more deeper. If we do bog down on a specific topic, I might not be able to share all my slides, but I'll be able to share the slides to you all after. A bit about me. So I'm a psychologist here in town. There's a picture of me and my daughter, Ava, who's now 13. I'm originally from back east, Buffalo, New York is where I grew up, Western New York State. Went to college in New York City, and I came out west after college, and I've been out west ever since. So I'm kind of a West Coast person. I didn't have any special outdoor or nature experiences growing up. But after college, I did come out west, and I started working in outdoor programs and wilderness therapy programs for young people. And I really did get deeply into the outdoors and doing outdoor guiding and work and environmental work and things like that. And I had some mentors who were counselors and psychologists at some of these wilderness therapy programs that I was working at, that inspired me to go back to school to study counseling. And then one thing led to another. I got into a doctoral program, became a clinical psychologist. And that was, more traditional training in hospitals and medical centers and doing research and things like that. So it's been a fairly organic path for me. But as I got into my work, I was really interested in the healing power of nature and wilderness therapy and what were the mechanisms there. And when I was getting into that, there weren't any places to study it. It's still kind of challenging to study even now, but it was seen as sort of a bit fringy, quite frankly, at the time, in the 90s. But that's a takeaway for me, is that things that used to be considered fringy are no longer. They're kind of quite mainstream, including nature and mental health and things like that. So I've been involved with academia and, doing research on climate change and working with the American Psychological Association. So I've had a lot of learning in this regard. And it's just myself and myself and my daughter, Ava. My wife died of breast cancer a few years ago. So I've had that experience as well. So I do take parenting really seriously. I'm the person there for my daughter. So some ground rules for environmental talks, just in general. It's nice to set the stage. and this is something to keep in mind for all of your meetings, right? These are ecological topics. They go in a number of directions. You know, the old quote from John Muir, when you pick out one thing in the universe, you find it hitched to everything else. So it's quite normal for our talk to go, we might talk about nature, we might talk about children, we might talk about child development, it might lead to schools and, you know, green spaces and gardens in schools, which then may lead to school funding or how schools are run and politics, et cetera, et cetera. So we find that these things are all bound up, and that's quite normal. And we just want to kind of be aware of that and hold the space for that. You know, this is emotional and intuitive for people. It's not just intellectual, these topics. There's an expressive element, an emotional element to these topics. People are often starved for opportunities to talk about their concerns about the environment or climate change. So they have this impulse to share their stories, which is something we have to recognize and bear witness to. Just bearing witness to the stories is really important. And there's a spectrum, even among a group like this, there's going to be a spectrum of beliefs and philosophies about nature, whether nature is separate from humans or whether we're interconnected or things like that. And we'll have different values about nature, you know, in terms of our use of nature or beauty or negative things in nature. So there's a lot of diversity in this environment. We call it environmental diversity. You know, all environmental problems are justice problems and social justice problems. And because the people that are impacted by environmental problems, for the most part, are the least privileged in the society. So as soon as we talk about environment, we have to start talking about diversity and social justice and environmental justice. And that needs to be talked about at the very onset, not later on down the line. It's tough to wrestle with this. Relatively few people in the US have advanced education in ecology or environmental philosophy. So we're all struggling to get our heads around climate change. It's what they call a hyper object. It's too big to capture, right? So that's just part of it. That's something to realize. If you're new and you feel like you can't get a grasp on it, that's perfectly normal. If you do this for 50 years, you're still going to have a challenge getting a grasp on it. So we have to be open about our biases and, you know, politics and motivated reasoning and things like that, and be open to humor if it's appropriate. You know, we have to be able to be flexible and be grounded. You know, if we can't access humor, that's a sign that we're stressed out. So we want to be thinking about this. So this big idea of environmental identity. This is a really simple idea, although many people haven't heard the term. People are aware of their, you know, cultural identity or their gender identity or their sexual identity or their regional identity, right? We have these different identities, ways we see ourselves in the world. But environmental identity is simply, you know, how we see ourselves in relation to nature and the natural world, right? So, you know, it's our sense of self in relation to nature, animals, and things like that. Someone might say, I'm a city person or I'm an outdoors person. That's a clue to their environmental identity. You know, but it's a way of describing a person that locates them in their context, and it has, you know, political and social ramifications. And I like this concept because it allows us to go in all directions. Once I talk about environmental identity, I can talk about people's nature experiences and their background, their values, you know, what they do regarding sustainability. We can talk about losses and difficult experiences. You know, we talk about the mental health benefits of nature. You know, so arguably what we're doing and what you're all doing is partly an environmental identity project for people, right? And it's really good. We can always come back to it, and ours is unique and special. The building blocks of environmental identity, you know, again, our other identities. You know, it's not enough to know, you know, I can know a bit about a person where they're from. Say they're from Pennsylvania, and I know better whether they're from like Philadelphia or Allegheny, Pennsylvania, then I can, in a sense, like male or female, I can know a little bit more about their environmental identity. Their social economic class, I can kind of tell. Their education, right? So as we layer these different kinds of identities, I can sort of make a prediction about someone's environmental values. So it is about this intersectionality. But obviously it's about where we grew up and our childhood experiences, our family, you know, things we've learned and done and that we're good at, you know, and in specific places, specific animals, specific trees, specific landscapes that we have emotional relationships with. And also, you know, loss and degradation come into play, and then whatever social group that we're in. So these are all building blocks of our environmental identity, you know, and it's fun to talk about people's nature experiences, you know, when we get people to reflect on their environmental identity, we can ask questions about places they remember, or animals, or experiences in their childhood, or, outdoor experiences, seeing the stars, or being in contact with wild places, or things they were good at, competency in the sense of learning how to do things like going camping or something like that, peak experiences, right? So, I mean, you all can be thinking about this as we're talking, right? You all have your own stories about this, rites of passages that you've had, arts and books and literature and things that have inspired you. Many of you are parents, so that's a big piece right now that brings it up for you. And this is an ongoing process, so it's not like your identity is finished. You're building this even now. And so I think, healthy parenting is about the parents building and celebrating their environmental identity and modeling that for their children. And it's just unique. And your children will also have their own environmental identity, which is going to be different than yours. But it is a process. When I was teaching, one of the exercises I would do with students is have people draw an environmental timeline. And you can just do a simple line on a paper and do, different ages and a couple things. But some people can get really elaborate about their life and where they lived and things like that. And so it's really fun. It could be an exercise you might do. This is a person that did a really elaborate life, diagram of where they were born in Death Valley and, where they lived around the world and things like that. And you all have a version of this. This is part of your story, your environmental story. So it's fascinating. You can get way into it. Some basic values underlie people's concerns about nature. There's basically three pathways. It's either concerns about myself and my family or my people. That's egocentric. There's altruistic values. I'm concerned about the community and other people outside of myself. And then there's more nature-based or what they call biocentric values. I'm concerned about ecology. I'm concerned about other species. And these aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, people have multiple, overlapping values, but you can generally meet anyone coming from these three directions. It's a larger topic we can't get into very much, but I love talking about all these different values that people have. It's a way for me to deal with diversity and talk to people because we have so many different values about nature. There's beauty in nature. There's a sense of control and the sense of, training animals or doing bonsai plants or making a garden. So there's a kind of a control and mastery. There's, personal relationships with nature and animals. There's moral sense of right and wrong. There's direct experience, like I like to do things and be out doing things. People have negative values about nature. They're afraid of the outdoors or wild places or animals or being dirty or whatever. Obviously, it's very symbolic. Animals and places symbolize things for ourselves. And then there's utilitarian values. And each country has their own recipe as well. I mean, in the United States, the typical values that people across the population endorse are, concerns for specific animals, like their pets or specific places, or sense of right and wrong, like, animal cruelty is generally seen as a taboo, people beating their pet or something like that. There's a lot of negative values in the US about aversion to nature and the outdoors, and then highly utilitarian, how is it about use, wise use? So we all have our personal combination. And then in couples, you'll have two people that come together with their combinations, which is interesting. So you can even do this kind of eco couples counseling sometimes, getting people to work together across their different values. So it's really neat. And then, how does this lead to action? There's a lot of ways to think about that. But basically, our values interact with what we know and what we believe about the world. And if we have environmental values of any kind, and we believe that there are issues in the world, there's problems, that we're under a threat, and that we have some ability to do something about it, some efficacy, then we tend to develop a norm or an obligation to take action. So we feel this impulse, we need to act. And then that action can go in a lot of directions. People do public action, private action, things like that. But it kind of is a mixture of your values and your beliefs. And again, we can get deep into this kind of stuff, but it just gives you a little flavor of the pathway. Interesting, in terms of activists, when they study who becomes activists and frontline people, it can come from a lot of directions. Sometimes people are already a known expert in a field and they become an activist. You can think of James Hansen, say, a climate scientist, and then he'll go and then protest because he's got all this notoriety and expertise. But, it might just be someone that signs up for a committee at their school or in their town and they start by taking action, and they learn everything about it. And sometimes they just become aware of things. You know, if we think about famous environmental actions like the Love Canal, action in New York State in the 70s. These are just neighborhood people that discovered there was pattern of illnesses in their neighborhood, and then they were able to link it back to chemical company that had contaminated the ground and things like that. So these quote unquote normal people then become activists. It doesn't really matter where you come in. I can come in just by signing up. Then I start learning. I become more of an expert. I become more empowered. So all of you have your stories as well. And this, again, is an ongoing process for all of us. There are shadow sides to environmental identity, right? There's a risk, right? There's a classic, Aldo Leopold quote, pains of an ecological education is, opening yourself to a world of wounds. So there's a lot of loss involved when we know about nature, even in the Pacific Northwest, what things would have been like in the past. So it's important to recognize that. And, that's the price we pay for this kind of work. It opens us up to grief and loss and, our privilege and injustice and traumas. And, there's nature blindness. We don't know enough about nature. We feel guilty and incompetent because we don't know all the trees and all the animal names and all the flower names and things like that. And it's stressful. It can be dangerous in some places to be an environmentalist. It can be dangerous. So depending on the context, it is actually dangerous to express some of these things. So like they say, loving the earth is a political act. And in some places that's really true. And it could be just, frustrating and absurd and meaningless at times. And it opens us up to kind of negative aspects of humanity. And then, sometimes people's environmental identity is limited to just pieces, like some loss, but they haven't been able to get a full picture of connection to nature and the natural world. So there's a lot of building for us, and this is common. Eco-anxiety was the word of the day just a month ago on the dictionary, thing on my home screen. It was just really interesting to see how, 20 years ago, this would have been really kind of an arcane term, seen about, just some of these environmentalist folks, but now it's just everywhere. So it is really, things are really changing. This whole idea of eco-anxiety, it's a spectrum. It's quite normal to be anxious about. Anxiety is simply fear wrapped in a cloud of mystery, right? We don't know what's going to happen, where it's really troubling, right? This feeling of anxiety, it's a normal emotion. It's really healthy. And we're anxious about something. It gives us cues that we might want to take action. And so it's totally normal to be anxious about environmental issues and climate change. And this is a spectrum. Some people have this. Most everyone has it. I would say there's very few people in the world that don't have some version of this. But for some people, this becomes more significant and even, impairing of them. And so we have to see that as well. This is a slide courtesy of Britt Ray, who's a person that I know is working on a book around climate change. She has a great kind of blog called Gen Dread or Generation Dread, and she posts a lot on these kind of topics. I've talked about this idea of being a climate hostage. We're kind of hostage to this situation. We can't do anything about it because certain key, powerful people have been stymieing change and doing misinformation. And that just really is a hard place to be. But it is, it's important to give voice to that kind of sense of this hostage, this feeling like a hostage, because it is, I think, a commonly felt experience. And then, we can get into, diagnosis of environmental, stress, typically, and as I'll talk about later, I say we have issues and we have issues. We have capital I issues that we want to, work on in the world, and we have our own issues, and those are both. So I find that people who are really, impacted in the sense of impairment because of environmental problems, say anxiety or depression, that's because they already have pre-existing vulnerabilities to anxiety or depression. So it's their pre-existing vulnerabilities, and then their environmental work will come together, right? So the apple doesn't fall, too far from the tree. So it's like, we have to work both on our stuff and our goals. And to the extent we can do both, we're going to be more effective. But we all have our stuff and our baggage of various kinds. Just a little bit on the research, just so you have a grounding in this. This is an image from one of the studies that I was involved in a while back. trying to bring all this mental health impact stuff together. The way it works is that, we have climate and weather, and climate is different than weather, right? Climate is the aggregate of what's happening in a region around the planet, and weather is what's happening at any given moment. But, climate impacts the weather, and it changes, and, dryness and droughts and rain and storms and things like that. And so that's affecting us. It affects us. But, it's mediated also by what we know and our education and what our attitudes are. So the world is not fully objective. It's really subjective. So we do have these events, but it's mediated through our media and our beliefs and our education. And then, there's 3 levels of climate impact. There's direct disaster impacts, fires, floods, droughts, storms, right? There's a whole disaster literature, that in mental health literature. And that's pretty simple to understand, Then there's the second level, which is really the chronic effects. It's migrants and refugees and economic problems and things like that, which spread out over time, causing, economic problems and regional conflicts and refugee crises and things like that. And then we have the indirect impacts, which is basically the vicarious impact of sitting with all this stuff. And that's very much mediated by what we know, our education and the media and stuff like that. And when I first did this, I was working on this 15 years ago, the indirect impacts was seen as speculative, like, oh, well, yeah, maybe there are indirect impacts. But now that's not speculation. We know for sure that people are stressed by the media, and they're stressed by, what they know of climate stuff around the world. And, these impacts are moderated by our resilience, what our resources are, where we're situated, what our socioeconomic status is, what our social supports are. Right. So I'll come back to this toward the end in terms of takeaways for your group. And again, there's good evidence of this stuff. Now it's not speculation anymore. We know for sure that climate change affects people's mental health in a number of ways. So let's think about some tools. What do we do, right? A big tool for everyone is understanding nature and the restorative benefits of being outside. That is our lifeline, right? There's a spectrum of nature we can think about. Nature is this philosophical concept, but we can break it down into a spectrum from, images and paint, art on the wall, like that image behind me, that's kind of virtual nature, and then there's indoor nature, plants and pets and things around our house, and domestic nature, and then nearby nature, our neighborhoods and parks, and then, managed nature is rural areas and farmland, and then we have wild nature. So there's a spectrum. And, we can tap into various parts of this in our lives, and we can do daily things, and then we can also do special things. And everybody, again, has their style, their unique style on this. There's a nature pyramid image that I like, and it kind of starts with sort of local, and then it builds up to regional, national, international in terms of scale, but also in terms of what you do on a daily basis. And you might think about your home space, but then, every once in a while you may go out to a special area, or once or twice a year, you might go to a nature area, or you might do a special trip. I mean, obviously travel is curtailed now, but you understand, people have places that they go to restore themselves. Justice rears its head here because not everybody has access to green spaces. That's a story, that's a thing. But there's generally 3 ways that nature benefits us. It's physiologically in our body, psychologically in terms of our mood and emotions, and then more cognitively in the sense of our focus and perspective. And there's a time piece. So I can take 5 minutes outdoors and I will relax, get a little more centered. I can do an hour, I can do 3 hours, I can do a day, so there's the dose response to this. And some of our outdoor experiences are, what they would call in the literature, like restorative, familiar. So it's just a place that I go all the time that I know really well, like a place in a park that I've gone many, many times. And as soon as I get there, I'm calm. And then we have these peak experiences, or what they would call diminutive experiences, where I go to the Grand Canyon and I'm in awe of the scale, and those happen once in a while. So there's different ways to tap into nature. Wild means different things to different people. I like to educate people. There are wilderness areas that are designated by law, and then are also just areas that appear to be wild to people. But typically, what the research shows is like 2 hours a week outdoors is really the minimum to get benefits, like 2 to 5 hours, they say. After 5 hours, there's not a clear bonus. But for daily life, trying to get outdoors, and this has now become much more codified. So keeping going here. I love to think about words from around the world. I have a pet project that's gathering different words for feelings and thoughts and emotions around the world. But there's just great words around the world. You know, can't pronounce some of these very well, but you know, this autosustainabilidad, you know, in Spanish, you know, this like self-sustainability, or buen venir, and you know, the sense of good life, or in Norway they talk about friluftsliv, you know, this free air life, being out in nature. You know, hojo, you know, this kind of peace balance in the Navajo culture. You know, smoltenstrale, you know, it's a strawberry patch. It's your little place that you go to restore. You know, everybody needs a little strawberry patch to go to, right? Or the Maori culture has great words for nature and the outdoors. You know, that Tangata Wenua is like the people of the land, or Mana Wenua is like a authority over the land. So it's very inspiring to think this is a global thing that we're working on. It's not just us here in Portland. Kind of rolling through some more tools. Selecting outdoor activities. It's basically a function of what your resources are in the challenge. And then we can also add meaning in there, right? So I have certain resources, and I can gauge what challenge I want to take. Say I want to go hiking in the forest. Well, I'll decide on the hike based on how it affects with my resources. But meaning makes a big difference. I might be a really big outdoors person, so I might do a very, you know, short walk at the Audubon Society with my child, and so it doesn't really challenge me physically, but the meaning of being out with my child might be great. So there's kind of 3 factors when you're thinking about outdoor stuff. And then of course we can, you know, visualize this stuff too, even if we can't get to it. So it's a good mental reset. And then just more about coping. Just lately in the last fall, I've been developing a lot of coping ideas for people with the fires. And, you know, I say validate, elevate, create. All right. So let's validate the concerns that the person has. Let's elevate them. Let's lift them up and treat them as importance. And let's get creative about them. The creative piece can go in a lot of directions, right? I could educate myself. I could delegate. I can moderate. I can try to pull my fears down, you know, and calm myself. Sometimes it's just validate, elevate, and meditate. Just sit with something for 5 minutes. All right. So it's nice to have a protocol. You know, what I find with people, especially environmental folks, they come in and it's like an upside down pyramid. Like the world is impinging on them. They have a sense of limited resources and all this stuff, elections and climate change and politics, and they feel inadequate. And so the reframe is shifting this around, right? Let's look at the pyramid from the base, and let's look at your resources in your foundation, right? What are your daily activities and practices that help you to be healthy and strong? And most people have a very similar bricks, you know, and then they have their own special bricks too. But, you know, that's, I think the feelings we want is like, let's get our base going. And then that organically will give us some energy to take on things over the long haul. So we talk about what to keep, what to remove, what to add in terms of our base. You know, mental resilience. I saw this just the other day from Regents Insurance, you know, take care of your body, put down your phone, do things that bring you meaning and find ways to help others. And I was thinking about this in terms of climate action. I think what you all are doing, you know, I think you all have a value of taking care of yourselves. You definitely want to do things that bring meaning and you want to help others. But this putting down your phone is a challenge, I think. And that's an occupational hazard of being an activist, because we're always in the news. We're always getting all this information, but we do need to be able to unplug. So what I'll tell people is, you know enough about climate change. You don't need to read another study for the rest of your life, and you know enough, right? So you don't need to keep pulling all this stuff in. We can't get to the nature unless we unplug. So that unplugging, at least temporarily, is really important. Okay, so I'm going to move quickly because my 30 minutes is just about up. But suffice to say that there is grief to work through, you know, around environmental losses, and we toggle between dealing with the loss and restoring. This is typically how we deal with grief and loss. Some people really need to get into the despair and really go deep in that. Other people need to work on the positive and broaden and build. Their positive emotions build on each other. So they talk about in positive psychology, broaden and build. And, you know, people tend to gravitate to both of these sides, and they're both helpful. You know, when I work with clients, I help them to think about what are they feeling in terms of what are they feeling in terms of their emotions, and then also what do they want to be feeling, like around climate change. I feel I feel all these things. What do I want to be feeling? Well, I want to be feel engaged or exploring or curious or graceful or appreciative. So that's what I mean by emotional regulation. And I can share this feelings list that I have. It's really helpful little tool. Regular self-help books are helpful in coping with environmental stuff. Just any good self-help book will help us get our head on a little better. And then the final thing I want to say is, you know, finding your place on the front lines. This is an important thing, particularly in your work. And this is a real graphic image of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests here. But that's to me an example of a frontline action where you're right there with the, you know, legal enforcers and potential for violence and things like that. And there's not a lot of room on the front line. There's a lot of room in the whole spectrum, right? So when I talk to people, you know, when I used to teach classes, I would say, let's line up in a line. Everyone get up, stand up in a line. This is the front line. That's where the smoke and the fire and the tear gas is. And this is the behind the lines. And you just line up how, you know, where you are in relation to that. And people will slot themselves. And certain people are frontline people. They're going to be right there. You know, other people, you know, there are many other places to be. You know, when I was younger, you know, when I was in college in the late 80s, it was apartheid. And so I was involved in apartheid protests and things like that. And I was a frontline person. Like if I was that person then, now I would have been downtown here in Portland at all these protests, you know. But, you know, now as a parent and things like that, I'm not necessarily frontline. But I'm doing other things. So we all have a place on the spectrum of activism. And that is helpful, I think, for people to find their spot. And that's going to change and evolve. You might have done something different when you're younger. You might do something different when you're older. You're doing what you do now, right? So that I think can be empowering for people. And so, yeah, the key insight again is, you know, in terms of coping, is we have issues and we have issues. I want to do things in the world and achieve. But I also have my baggage and my vulnerabilities and my family history. So I can have issues with authority, like changing authority. And I can also have authority issues because of how I was raised or my family. And those are not mutually exclusive, right? And when we have insight about that, we can be more effective. And to the extent we can, we're going to be less likely to burn out, because people burn out when they're just unconsciously working out stuff without really being clear.
My anxiety, at least, and I think I've heard this echoed by other people, is related to God. What was your term? Wasn't super problem. It was beyond that. It's like just the scale of
Like
you know, the enormity of climate. Yeah, and just feeling like it's this like big intractable thing, and not even knowing how to start. You've used this. I've heard you use this metaphor of kind of like, you know, what's in your box, and you kind of, you know, figure, you know, that you have finite time and resources, and getting really clear about you know, where each of us is kind of personally working to move the needle. I'd be curious to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we're coming up on the hour, and I'm happy to go a little longer if you want in terms of time. Yeah, well, you know, what I'd learned from one of my clients who was a medical doctor is that when they teach medical students and medical residents, you know, when they're getting into the hospital, they say, you know, you focus on your box, like what is in your box. These are your duties. There's a lot of other things going on, but that's not your concern. You focus on that. And it's a way to simplify when there's a ton of information in a complex setting. And that is a helpful thing to think about on any given day. We have a box, you know, what we can accomplish on a given day or at a certain place in our life. So it kind of goes along with the pyramid model, you know. I've got some bricks that I need to do every day. I've got a box of things that I'm focusing on. It doesn't mean that I deny all the other things outside, and I might pick and choose about, where I put my, what I target on any given day, but I can't do everything at the same time, and so, again, it does come down to, that centering. Having the box, I think, helps to center us, helps to, cognitively limit our options, because we have too many options, too much stimuli, it's overwhelming. And so, as you think about your role as a climate activist, for example, what is in my box? What can I do? Where can I exert my energy within my locus of control? Sometimes I just need to sit and bear witness, and I can't do anything. And I need to be quiet, but that's okay too. There's always a time. One of my colleagues, Kim Stafford, who's a poet, I knew at Lewis and Clark, he had all these great sayings, and he would say, well, we're ready for when the barriers fall. We're ready for when the barriers fall. So we're ready to go into action when the time is right, when there's a teachable moment. So that's also helpful to think about, just being ready. There's going to be a teachable moment, a thing, and just being ready for that.
Thanks, Thomas. That speaks really powerfully to me too, the idea of the box. And your comment earlier about knowing enough. I feel a lot of guilt. I don't know about anyone else when I see like climate articles, and I think like, oh, I need to read the next one. I need the like, this is what I care about. This is what I'm interested in. But then I'm like, what's the point? I know this, and it might make me feel worse, is my thought. But thinking of like, I do know enough. I am active, and I want to be more active, and saving energy and time for that makes a lot of sense.
Every once in a while, there's a good article, and we learn something new. So there is learning.
Right.
But again, it's sort of like being at a buffet and we're trying to eat too many things. That's what the information, is like. And so it's really about, taking time and having a stack of things, and having some time to read it from time to time. Yeah, that Timothy Morton, the philosopher, talks about climate change in this hyper object. He has a BBS or BBC show that I just discovered recently, where he talks about this kind of hyper sense, and it's pretty interesting, actually, from a kind of a British philosophical standpoint. So you might look up Timothy Morton and that.
As we hit the hour, I just want to let people know we are going to be sharing afterwards, right? I'm not sure in what format, but some kind of, is it the slides or just some resources that they'll get afterwards?
Yeah, I'll definitely share. I'll clean up my slides and send those to you.
Sure. That'd be great.
There's a bunch of all the stuff was referenced in there, and maybe I can share some links to some of the blog posts that I've done for my psychology practice, because I kind of distilled this down into some simple ideas and some videos and things like that. So that's fair game. And people are also welcome to contact me if they want to follow up or have questions as well.
Okay, thank you. That'd be wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, with that, we'll close it. Just a minute over, which never happens. But thank you all so much for joining. And likewise, feel free to follow up with us at Families for a Livable Climate if you're not already in touch. And if you have any interest in joining or supporting our work to continue to build a platform for parents to meaningfully engage, to fight for a livable and thriving future for our kids. So thanks everybody for joining for an hour, and look forward to hopefully seeing you down the road.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you, Thomas.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was really nice to connect with you all today.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.